Have you ever wondered how Vecna got his powers? Or why the Upside Down feels so twisted and mysterious? What exactly is Dimension X? And how does it connect to everything in Stranger Things? If you're like me, you're probably itching to know the lore before the final episode is out. Well, you're in the right place, because today, I'm going to explain all that and more. But before we dive in, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on Stranger Things secrets or updates. The beginning, Project Rainbow, and Dimension X.
You shouldn't be wandering the halls.
It's against the rules.
And not safe. You shamed me today.
Alright, let's jump into this strange world of dimensions, secret government experiments, and mysterious powers. The story of Stranger Things goes back in time. It takes us to the year 1943. The US government performs an experiment called Project Rainbow. Now, this might sound familiar because it's loosely based on a real-time urban legend known as the Philadelphia experiment. The real experiment supposedly tried to make a Navy ship invisible to enemy radar during World War II. In the Stranger Things verse, the US government has the same goal, to get the ship, the USS Eldridge, to disappear from radar. But once they activated the experimental device aboard the ship, something went very wrong. Instead of invisibility, the ship teleported to a strange, dark place called Dimension X. When the ship returned, most of the crew were dead, killed by mysterious creatures known as Demogorgons, except for one man, Captain Brenner, who was known as the father of Martin Brenner. If you've watched Stranger Things, you might remember this guy. What made him so special? Well, his body was so changed by the time he was inside this dimension, it altered his blood in some unexplainable way, and the only person he confided in about the whole experience was his son, Martin. Martin Brenner's obsession. You see, Martin Brenner grew up fascinated by his father's story. He became so obsessed with recreating the experiment that sent the USS Eldridge to Dimension X. By the 1950s, Martin was put in charge of a similar experiment. This was the Nevada experiment, which aimed to open a gateway back to Dimension X. But here's the twist. A rogue staff member working on the project stole some of the equipment and hid it in a nearby cave system. The cave later played a big role in the origin story of Henry Creel, who you now know as Vecna. Young Henry and the cave incident.
So when Vecna was chasing Max, she ran into a place where Henry gets extremely scared to enter, and Max even said she had never seen Henry this terrified.
Henry Creel's family used to live near the Nevada cave system during this time. Henry was a curious child who had a taste for exploration. He often found himself drawn to these caves. One day, he was exploring the caves when he came across the stolen scientific equipment the rogue staff member had hidden. When Henry accidentally activated the device, something mind-blowing happened. He and the rogue stag member got transported to Dimension X. Sadly, the staff member didn't survive, but Henry did, though he came back changed forever. Now, what was in Dimension X? Easy peasy, Demogorgons. They came under the influence of a mysterious, shadowy entity called the Mind Flayer, or Mind Flayer. This exposure didn't just change Henry's surroundings, it changed him completely. His blood was altered, his personality became twisted, and this is likely where Vecna's telekinetic and psychic powers began. Hawkins' lab and testing of Henry Creel.
You see, humans are a unique type of pest, multiplying and poisoning.
Martin Brenner eventually recovered his stolen equipment, including the spyglass that originally belonged to Henry. He used it as a clue to track Henry down and bring him to Hawkins' lab. This way, Henry became the very first test subject in a new series of experiments. Now, this is interesting because it kind of contradicts what Henry said in the show. He claimed he always had powers, that they were part of him. He didn't remember his encounter with the Mind Flayer as a child and only recalled it after Eleven teleported him to Dimension X later on. So, which version of it is true? Did Henry always have powers? Or did Dimension X and the Mind Flayer grant them to him? Well, for now, it's one of those mysteries that the upcoming episodes might explain better. What is Dimension X exactly? And what is Dimension X exactly? Okay, so we know that it's this dark and dangerous place, Perhaps a post-apocalyptic wasteland inhabited by demogorgons, strange bats, and other terrifying creatures. But what else? Dimension X is a separate dimension from the Upside Down, which is what we see in Hawkins. They're often confused, but the show and the canon material make a very clear distinction. You can think of Dimension X as the original home of Mind Flayer and demogorgons. It's a barren wasteland with no water, lots of floating rocks, and a deadly environment. This is the place where Henry ended up after being teleported there by 11. It's where he gained his dark powers too. The Hellscape, the space between dimensions.
At first, I believed you had sent me to my death, to purgatory.
Now here's where things get even more complicated. There's a third place called Hellscape. This isn't Dimension X or the Upside Down, but a space between dimensions, including the real world, sometimes called right side up. The Hellscape acts like a guardian between these worlds, stopping things from moving between dimensions. But somehow, Henry was able to move from the Hellscape into Dimension X. How? One theory is that because Henry was already infected with particles from the Mind Flayer, which has a hive mind connection, he was able to survive and even control portals between these dimensions. This explains why 11 couldn't just kill Henry in the lab fight. Instead, she teleported him into the Hellscape, where he fell through a portal opened by the Mind Flayer's influence, the Mind Flayer and Vecna's powers. This brings us to the relationship between Henry and the Mind Flayer. Many fans assume that Henry is the one controlling the Mind Flayer, but the truth might just be the opposite. The Mind Flayer is a shadowy, hive-minded entity that controls many creatures in Dimension X and the Upside Down. Henry's exposure to the Mind Flayer's particles, starting as a child and later after his banishment, means he's closely linked to it. The Broadway play, The First Shadow, reveals that the Mind Flayer might actually be controlling Henry, not the other way around. When Henry returned to the real world, it wasn't exactly Henry who came back, but a part of the Mind Flayer's influence. This explains why Henry's views changed so much after he spent time in Dimension X, and why he became this full of himself kind of person. How the Upside Down came to be? So what about Upside? How does it fit into Dimension X and the Mind Flayer? The Upside Down is actually a separate dimension, created in 1983. It's the moment 11 touched a Demogorgon in the void. If you think about it, 11 was a part of the real world, and the Demogorgon was in Dimension X. When they physically touched, the two dimensions overlapped, which resulted in a new dimension, the Upside Down. It had elements of both worlds, and that's why Nancy said the Upside Down was frozen on the day Will disappeared. It's not frozen at all. It's just a snapshot of Hawkins at that exact moment in time, replicated in this new, twisted reality. Martin Brenner's secret role.
I could reach into others, into their minds, their memories.
How was Martin Brenner involved? Well, he's the real mastermind behind much of this. Martin was obsessed with reaching Dimension X, just like his father. When 11 teleported Henry to the Hellscape in Hawkins' lab, Martin realized Henry might still be alive in another dimension. Martin's official story was that 11's recon missions were to spy on Russians, but secretly, he hoped 11 would find Henry or that Henry would reach 11 somehow. That's why he encouraged 11 to face the Demogorgon rather than run. He knew from his research that the monster was connected to both Dimension X and Henry. How did Vecna get his powers? That brings us to one last question. How did Vecna really gain his powers? Putting it all together, Henry was exposed to Dimension X as a child through stolen equipment in the caves. In this dimension, he came under the influence of the Mind Flayer, which altered his blood and gave him telekinetic powers. When 11 teleported him into the Hellscape, he survived thanks to the Mind Flayer's influence and escaped into Dimension X. Over time, the Mind Flayer and Henry became closely linked. Henry used the Mind Flayer's particles to create his own monstrous spider form and his dark, destructive powers. 11's contact with a Demogorgon, A hybrid dimension between the real world and Dimension X created the Upside Down later. What does it say about the last episode of Stranger Things? The Upside Down isn't just another world. It's a wormhole-like bridge between Earth and a darker realm called the Abyss. It's held open by exotic matter that keeps the connection stable, and its existence is tied to past events from Hawkins' lab experiments. Vecna isn't the only threat. The Mind Flayer may be the true force behind everything. The Mind Flayer infected Henry and gave him powers, meaning Vecna might be controlled or used by an older, deeper evil. So far, Will reveals he can channel powers tied to the Upside Down connection. Holly and other kids are trapped in a realm manipulated by Vecna's mind control. The gang comes up with a last-ditch plan to draw the Abyss close enough to hit and collapse the wormhole. The last episode is just about to be released in a few days. What are your thoughts on this? Share them in the comments below. And before you leave, make sure to hit that subscribe button if you don't want to miss out on more updates.